Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this study today as we're continuing to go through and do the Hebrew word study. And we're in First Samuel chapter 17. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen today. And again, this is so interesting. Again, the beauty of the Hebrew language. I hope you are in awe of it as much as I am. And again, it never seems to grow old. There's always new things. And so as we look into this episode that's coming here of David and Goliath, and we know the story so well, but there are just tidbits of information like we saw last week about Goliath and where he came from. And today we're going to look at verse 5, which it discusses his armor. And again, why does the Bible find it necessary to go into such detail on what he is wearing? You don't seem to find that in other episodes of other battles that take place, but definitely here with Goliath, it would have been enough just to know that, hey, this is a huge giant. Here's how big he is. Who cares what he's wearing? Who cares how his battle armament is all set up? This is a big dude, and this is a scary situation. But it takes what is a formidable encounter and even adds more formidability to it by telling us what this giant had on him as far as armament. And I believe that's the reason for it, is just to increase the amount of awareness we have as to what kind of miracle the Lord truly performed here in the, as we know, the ultimate slaying of Goliath. Hopefully that wasn't a spoiler for any of you who weren't aware of the story. But as we look at verse 5 in front of you, I'm going to read out of the Jewish JPS translation and take it for how they translate it, and then we'll unpack this on the Bible Hub. And it says that he had a helmet of brass upon his head and was clad with a coat of mail, and that's M-A-I-L, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass, and he had greaves, which is a word I wasn't familiar with at all, greaves of brass upon his legs, and a javelin of brass between his shoulders, and the shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and his shield bearer went before him. So that is the old JPS, as it's called, the Jewish Publication Society. Probably reads very similar to the more of the original authorized King James Version. But as we look at the Hebrew here on your screen, let's take a look at this word helmet. I found this fascinating, that this word, again, remembering that there are hyperlinks above here, you can click on the 3553. It'll take you to the concordance, the lexicon, and it starts telling us that we're not real sure what he's wearing. We're not, the words themselves, like here it says the word origin is of an uncertain derivation. We understand it's on his head. Okay, we can picture that. What I find interesting is this word is only used 6 times in all of the Hebrew Bible. You would think with all the battles and things that take place, skirmishes that take place, more than 6 times, uh, nothing's mentioned about helmets and that type of battle armament. And as we look a little deeper into the meaning of the word, we'll find that the word for helmet and turban are somewhat interchanged. And it's actually, I'm going to go back to that word again, because on the side here, it tells you the number of places and where it's used in the Hebrew Bible. And we see Samuel, but the one that is really interesting here is Isaiah 59 and 17. And those of us that are familiar with the apostolic writings, or otherwise known as the New Testament, and where it says, take on all the armor of God, it will mention something called the helmet of salvation. And we have pretty much, or I have pretty much thought this was pretty much a New Testament just a symbolism of spiritual warfare. And was I surprised to see this written here in Isaiah 59 and 17 in the Hebrew Bible, that this was metaphorically speaking ahead to the helmet of salvation and giving us an indication. So understanding that the writings in the apostolic writings or New Testament are based solidly on the Hebrew Bible, or the Old Testament, as Christians will call it. And so I thought that was a beautiful outline. The next word we come to is this word for nechoset, which is translated in the JPS as brass, but here is translated as bronze. Most people really don't know the difference between brass and bronze. I guess here's where my engineering background comes a little bit into play. And so my engineering brain kicked in again after being retired for a little bit, and I had to do a little bit of fact finding as to the different chemical compositions of between brass and bronze. And what I found out here is the JPS as brass is really not a correct translation. Again, I wouldn't expect Bible translators to be have any metallurgy background, but they could have done a little bit better to find out that brass really wasn't invented until much later in the time frame here, probably about 500 BC. But what's important here is this composition of this metal is mostly copper, which has been around for a long time. And bronze is a amalgamation or a mixing of the copper with tin, whereas brass is mixing of copper with zinc. And zinc, the reason it hadn't been used till later times is it's very difficult to quarry or separate from its ore, and it requires a temperature close, higher and hotter than what they were capable of creating back at that time. Whereas mixing the copper with tin was known metallurgy capable with lower temperature equipment, basically what coal and wood and those kind of things would give you. And so again, as I'm saying that, I'm not sure if they had coal back in those days in this area of the world, but definitely with wood, they could not achieve a temperature high enough to separate zinc and melt it into the copper. So bronze would be the appropriate metal here. But what's interesting here is the difference in the metal composition for what are offensive armament, being steel and iron, and what is defensive weaponry, which would be what he's wearing, and that is out of bronze. Easier to fashion, providing ability to conform it to the bodily shapes, which iron was not able to do. So a little bit, probably more than what most of you want to know about metallurgy and difference between those things. So we'll move on. Get to the next word here, the Vishayon, which is a coat, really is a word for body armor. But what's interesting here is this body armor is combined with this next word of kaskasim, and it's translated as mail. And of course, the mail speaking here is not U.S. Postal Service type mail, but it's making reference to something maybe familiar with from the Middle Ages, where you would see a warrior or a knight in shining armor, and sometimes you would see them when they're actually in battle, that they would wear this kind of like a chain link fence, but very small chains linked together that would be out of steel and providing armament and being somewhat flexible. Well, again, this is a really bad translation because that didn't exist back then. But the words themselves, when you look into the Hebrew, would talk about a coat with scales on it and would liken it to the scales on a fish. And so the word picture I'm getting here is a garment that he's wearing that have little plates of bronze on them, similar to fish scales, and providing his protection. Again, maybe semantics, maybe it doesn't matter, but it gives us a better, at least me, a better picture of what Goliath was wearing standing out in this battlefield, that he wasn't dressed like um, Sir Arthur or any of the King Richard of the Round Table or any of those medieval knights. Didn't have anything that looked like that. He was dressed in um, little shingles and scales of bronze on a garment that he wore. And then it gets interesting here because it talks about how he was armed with this, and it gives an indication of the weight. And it says it was 5,000 shekels of this bronze. And so again, I need to look up with, okay, what's a shekel? We associate it with a measure of money used in Israel today. We know it was based upon money that was used in ancient times, and that many times the money was translated into a physical weight of what was being exchanged, because the denomination or numbers stamped on it didn't mean as much as the weight of it. And that there are shekels here of bronze. We see historically there are shekels of many different precious metals. There are shekels of gold, there are shekels of silver, and we know the, again, using a big word here, specific gravity or the composition of these metals. Some are denser, like gold is very dense. So it would be a smaller piece of gold that would equal a shekel compared to bronze, which is lighter. So it would be a larger piece of bronze would equal the same weight as a smaller piece of gold, and maybe silver would fit in between. And so this is how their money worked. That now trying to figure out what was the weight of a shekel. And we don't know specifically. There are three options we have that I find are given through Google searches, and that is shekel was either 11 ounces, 14 ounces, or I'm sorry, 11 grams, 14 grams, or 17 grams. And so translating grams into ounces and kilograms into pounds, we get 5,000 of these 14-gram weights would give us 57 kilograms or 125 pounds. So this was a very heavy piece of armament. 125 pounds, a good sized man today can lift that. I know that our military, when they are in battle, I have heard that their packs that they wear, the armament that they carry, well exceeds that. So again, this is still a very heavy piece of armor that he's carrying here, and being of bronze, being very heavy. So we continue and we get to verse 6, and we see words here that change meanings. Says he has an armor, who mis hot, again, is a difficult word to translate. We open it up and it comes up to something that says graves. We don't have a clue what that is. It's only used one time in the Hebrew Bible. I looked it up. I looked up the Metzach, which is the word origin. Really do not come up with anything other than there was one indication in Jastrows, where it had a word somewhat spelt similar to a rain gutter. And now I don't know what their rain gutters look like back then, but I was picturing these U-shaped metal troughs like we have hanging on our house, and trying to see, well, okay, that could be a rain gutter, maybe the same way they used centuries and millennial ago. And of course, that would form a U-shaped tile or U-shaped shape around his legs and provide this armament around his legs. So I feel okay with that interpretation. Again, it's bronze. It's got some weight to it. It talks about a javelin of bronze between his shoulders. Again, a javelin as we know it today is probably not applicable to this word vechidon, as it's outlined in the scriptures, because they feel this is a narrow piece of metal armament that went between his shoulders and covered the shoulder blades, between the shoulder blades and up around the back of the neck, which would be to me very needful. And it also talks, just think, saying that made me think about, what David did after he knocked giant Goliath to the ground, that he grabbed Goliath's sword and he cut off his head. Well, this Vechidon would be something that would inhibit that David maybe had to remove or move out of the way so that he could actually come in and finish the job and sever Goliath's head from his shoulders here. So again, very, very interesting. Then as we look at the last verse we're going to look at is this staff of his spear. You'll see that there are two words, one in brackets and one in parentheses. This is what you'll find in the original Masoretic writings of what's called Kerev and Kethiv, basically kind of saying what is written and what is understood. You'll see the spellings a little bit different. There's the vav, there's the chet, and the sade sufif, sofit versus the vav and an ayin with a sadi sufit. And so they didn't really, again, because they really didn't know the correct word to go in here, they included both. So you won't find that in the English translation, but you will find it in the Hebrew text. Basically, this is a word that is more related to the shaft of an arrow, and so is applicable to the staff or shaft of his spear. And it talks about it was huge, like the beam, a weaver's beam, and the spearhead was of iron, again, a stronger material necessary for fighting battles and piercing through the bronze. The steel or the iron would be strong enough to pierce through the layers of the bronze, because bronze is a softer metal. It gives the weight of this spearhead is 600 shekels, and doing some quick math, we get a 15-pound spearhead. Again, pretty heavy, would take a pretty good arm. I would think that the shaft that this mounts on would probably weigh equal, being that it's long and the diameter would be substantial to hold this. But then we are going to close out with this poor guy at the end. He is the shield bearer. Again, this word shield is kind of interesting. Clicked on it and take into Hitzana, and this word has some cool things about it. It's only mentioned 4 times in the Bible, in 5 verses, 4 times alone in Samuel. So it seems to be something just related to Samuel and his writings. But this armor bearer was a guy who would carry a shield in front of Goliath. Um, this poor guy was stuck in the middle. And again, this shield was not the round, small ones that are about 24-inch in diameter. These are shields that are about the size of the body of Goliath, which means this shield bearer was holding up this big plate in front of him, whether it was steel, whether it was bronze, whether it was wood or something similar. We really don't know, but he had to be a fairly tough, strong guy to carry this. And in many times, the armor bearer also carried extra weapons for his servant, for the guy he's serving. So it's very conceivable that this shield bearer also had a bunch of weapons strapped on his back that Goliath could be near and grab as needed. And how much faith and trust the shield bearer had to have in the qualities of the person who was fighting and actually protecting him as he was out there without protection, trusting that the guy he's bearing the armament for would take care of him. And there's many offshoots of that type of mentality of a shield bearer or armor bearer and its significance. And even in a modern times of having someone to stand for you and with you and to be your armor bearer in a spiritual sense. And so, again, very interesting verbiage, very interesting word pictures that I hope were being formed in your mind as they were in mine. And again, the whole purpose of this is just to show you what a beautiful Word of God we have and how beautiful this Hebrew language is to give us the ability to unpack these words, get a little bit better understanding of what this formidable giant named Goliath looked like before he confronts David. And so we'll get more into it next week. And I pray that this has been a blessing to you. And God bless you. And you have a great rest of your day. And we'll see you next week.